Today, I'm joined by four-time Emmy-nominated filmmaker Isabel Castro, director of Selena y Los Dinos, a deeply intimate portrait built from personal archives that brings Selena back not just as legend, but as sister, daughter, wife, and artist. Isabel, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.
So, look, what moved me about Selena y Los Dinos is that it doesn't treat Selena like some kind of monument. It treats her like a person that you're trying to get close to. Why did this film need to focus on intimacy rather than iconography?
Well, thank you for that question because this very thing, oh, I'm so sorry. I have to put this on airplane mode.
It's always the way.
Um, I always get so mad at crew when they don't do that in interviews, and here I am totally breaking the first rule of an interview. Um, but in any case, I love this question because it was like a real kind of guiding principle in terms of the approach of this film. Was that I wanted it to feel as intimate and personal as possible, and that was done in service of really trying to make Selena feel like a three-dimensional person that was a young girl that kind of grew up to become this legendary symbol. Before I started the project, I knew Selena only as a symbol, and a symbol that was like deeply, deeply meaningful to me. And I think that when I first started working on this project, I was kind of daunted by the prospect of retelling a story that I already knew, that I thought audiences might already know. And I thought that the only way to kind of cut through the noise, so to speak, or, to make something that felt different and felt new, would be to really try to get as close as possible to trying to tell the story about Selena, that removed her symbolism and really just focused on her as a young woman kind of coming of age. And so I think the other thing that kind of enabled that was that as I got to know her family more and more, like she really kind of like they started painting her as a sister and as a wife and as a daughter, and she kind of transformed from a symbol to somebody that I started to connect and relate to on a deeply kind of more personal level. So I wanted to transmit that onto the screen.
Yeah, there's a real trust in this film. Selena's family wanted you to tell this story. What did that trust and connection with the family actually unlock for you as a filmmaker emotionally and, of course, editorially?
I think that trust, I think that there was like a baseline amount of trust, just that we had a shared understanding of the cultural significance of this story. I think sometimes what happens with stories in the Latino space in the United States is that sometimes translate, you have to do a bit of translation, literally and figuratively. Like you have to explain to people why Selena is as important as she is symbolically, or why she is as important as she is, to Mexican American culture. And I think that the family kind of right out the gate understood that I knew that innately. And so I was kind of starting off with that as a foundation, but the trust that you see on camera was built over the course of over 2 years. We didn't start we didn't do any of the interviews until we had finished digitizing all of the archive, or digitized at least most of it. And the reason for that was that I really wanted to get to know the family on a personal level. And I wanted them to get to know me. Like I wanted them to really understand my motives. I really wanted to understand what they felt was important to share about their story. So it was 2 years of going out to lunch and having dinners and having conversations that are not on camera, It was a process that I'm not used to doing because I'm extremely used to just having a camera on me all the time. And in some ways, it was, and at many points, it was discomforting because when you're making a film, you want to make sure you're not missing anything. But to me, I felt like the single most important ingredient of this film was going to be to build trust and to really get on the same page about what we all wanted out of the film. And I felt like that was only going to be accomplished in the absence of cameras. And so after 2 years of kind of a camera-less relationship forming, that's when we brought in the cameras and did these interviews, all of which lasted over 5 or 6 hours. And by that point, we really had established trust. We'd established boundaries. We'd established ways to kind of be able to have a conversation that felt more intimate and closer. And to me, that was really meaningful on a personal level, but it was also artistically and creatively meaningful because I felt that it would give insight into an otherwise known story. It was going to add another layer to it because it was going to afford audiences a look into the perspectives of people that knew Selena best and were talking about her in really honest and really trusting ways.
It blows my mind that you have such patience to spend that amount of time getting to know the family, to get really in the weeds on what is important to them, what their priorities are, and then of course that leads to this beautiful film about this beautiful person and her family. But what struck me is looking back over your work, you are more of a verite filmmaker, and here this is more expository and of course reliant on the various videos and archival footage that you're able to put together. So how do you find a film inside the footage instead of forcing it through that exposition? Like what did you mean by doing that instead of maybe going the usual way that you would have done it?
That was the biggest challenge of making it for me as a filmmaker, because this was the first archival film I've ever done. And I studied photography. I shoot a lot of my own work. I feel most comfortable in the world with a camera in my hands and behind the camera. And that's how I got into filmmaking. And so for me, making a film about material, with material and footage that was shot by other people, wasn't directed by me, was shot for another context, for another use. It was a completely different process. The skills, there were a lot that translated, but the process itself was extremely different because what I'm used to doing is finding a story and kind of writing the story, telling the story through images and and finding it in the real world. That's what I love about documentary and what drew me to it in the first place. And here I had to find it within the archive. I had to find it within the material. And man, did I fall in love with it. Like I totally fell in love with the archive. I had completely underestimated how difficult that process was. Going into it, I was kind of cocky. I was kind of like, oh, well, the footage is there, and it was so challenging to, it felt like an excavation process. It was so similar in a lot of ways, but like the way in which you find the story is different. Like you have to excavate as opposed to collect. And I learned a lot about verite through doing archive, because what was important to me was that as soon as I saw the archive and saw how beautiful it was, and it was beautiful for a lot of different reasons. I mean, one, and the most important and salient, I think, is because it was so authentic and so honest. It's like home family videos. Like you're entering,
Yeah.
a lot of the time Suzette was entering the space with the camera, and she knew everyone in that space on a personal level. And so the footage just feels so personal and so intimate. And the texture of it is so authentic. Whereas when you're a documentary filmmaker, you enter a space and there's already a built-in distance that is unable to totally cut through unless it's a personal story. And I think that watching down this footage, I said, oh, this footage, this is the most important part of this film in my mind. I mean, beyond the family's kind of the interviews and their trust and their kind of like their transparency, like the material itself, I just treated with a lot of reverence, and I wanted to use as much of it as possible. So I wanted to find, it's almost as if I treated the footage like verite footage. I wanted to find the shape of the story within the archive itself. And, archive and found footage can be used in different ways. A lot of times it's used as B-roll or to illustrate an interview. We kind of took an approach where we started the edit long before we did the interviews. So because we wanted to find the shape of the story within the actual footage. And I think that all of my experience in verite allowed for me to kind of view and treat the material in that way, as opposed to seeing it in a different way. Like I really just translated it as verite footage.
To me, that feels like it was meant to be, that this story needed to be told from that perspective. And I love it how you characterize it as excavating or digging for those artifacts, the gold nuggets, because that's exactly how I felt after watching the film. And this is why. Whenever I think about Selena, I obviously, because this is what we all do, we think about the tragedy. I mean, that's just, of course, it's the big headline. And most projects about her rush towards that tragedy, but you don't. This film stays with her life, her work, her joy. So was that refusal to sensationalize the ending clear from the start for you, or did it emerge in the edit?
I think it was a mixture of both. It was clear from the start that I wasn't interested in that. And the family wasn't either, to be honest. Like, we had this opportunity to work with this amazing material. And what a shame it would have been to overshadow any of it with the sensationalism of her death, which ultimately was just a tragic accident. Like, I think people, I just didn't want to distract people, audience's attention away from the beauty and the joy, both of her story, but of the material. And so, so that was pretty clear from the start. I think though that like the extent to which we pushed that, which was, I mean, if you watch the film, like we really minimized it even more than I had originally anticipated, emerged in the edit where like I just realized how irrelevant it felt to the story we were building. Like, we treat her death with the same kind of shock and the same kind of like, it comes out of nowhere that I felt people in her life and audiences experience. Like she was on a rocket ship and then it just totally came out of left field. And I wanted people to feel that abruptness. I wanted people to feel that like confusion and just like, I'm okay if people are angry at the film for not indulging in the death or not indulging in any foreshadowing, because I wanted people to feel upset and angry and surprised. And that as like a narrative approach emerged in the edit, because we were trying to find different ways to kind of get to this really horrible and kind of inevitable conclusion to the story, and didn't know how to do that. And then over time realized that that's the way that we wanted to do it.
To me, it was like a real sense of loss, because there's so much joy in this film. And then, of course, we have to remember how it ends, and it ends so awfully. But another thing that I really loved is the title itself is such a statement, like calling it Selena y los Dinos. insists that this is about a band and a family and a collective, not just her. When did you know that the film had to draw that line so clearly?
I love that you picked up on that because I think um, I realized that once I started to understand their story better, I began to realize that though Selena is singular and ultimately just completely irreplaceable, I think that people, myself included, didn't or don't realize how much of her career was was as part of a family band. Like I think that it really was only until a few months before her death that she kind of officially went solo, and a lot of that was because of marketing reasons and because she was wanting to cross over into a part of the industry in which the family didn't have as much experience. But the Selena, the music that we know and love, and the performances that we know and love, those were all a product of a family effort. And I also felt that, you know, as I got to see more and more of Selena's interviews, I realized how Selena was media trained from a really, really, really young age. And to get to know and understand Selena, the best way to do that was going to be by understanding her family, because there was a limit that we were able to explore the different facets of Selena's personality and life through her own words, because she had been trained from a very young age to kind of be very kind of put together in front of the camera, or very kind of like selective about what she shared. And so to get to know her required getting to know the whole family. And so the more I understood these different things, the more I realized, oh, this isn't a story just about Selena. This is a story about her whole family and the whole band. And I think it took us all, like me, my team, my editors, my producers, a second to understand, because I think that when you're tasked with the job of making the definitive Selena documentary, you go into it being like, okay, we're going to focus exclusively on her. I think people are like, executives are like, we want to have the film exclusively focus on her. So it was really counterintuitive to step back and be like, the best way we're going to do this is actually to focus on the family.
Yeah, I think that's a huge risk, and it really could, maybe it wouldn't have worked, but in this, it just works so perfectly. It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But here's another thing that I found quite risky that I think really landed well. I really admire that you don't sanitize Selena. Like, she's warm, she's funny, we love her, but she's also really driven. She's very strategic. She's very aware of what she wants. Why was it important to let all of that sit on screen, even if it pushes against the myth?
That was really, really important to me, because I think going back to what we talked about the way, I think over the years, Selena has become a symbol and has almost become like mythologized to the extent of like becoming almost, other human. Like it just, I think that like I really wanted to have her feel as human as possible. And the only way to do that is to show a person's flaws, because there is no human on that has ever lived that doesn't have flaws, whether that be ambition or whether that be like I think in Selena's case it was actually really challenging, because I think that I expected to find more flaws within her personality and within the footage, and I think that she was really, really actually I think she was special. I think she was really kind of had a really beautiful heart, but I think that there were aspects of her that felt a little bit more complicated than I'd seen them represented in the past. And I felt that trying to tease those things out were going to allow people to connect with her even more deeply. And they were also going to trust the film and trust the narrative better if they were able to connect on that level. So I tried to the best of my ability to try to find those parts of Selena that were, and I'm not even sure if they're flaws, but that just had some complications. I think she was really ambitious. I think she really cared about, like making money. I think she cared about that from a really young age. I think that, there's just so many aspects of her personality that people kind of could interpret in different ways. And I wanted to tease those things out so people could connect to her.
Yeah, she's not necessarily Saint Selena. That would have been so boring. We've seen that, and this just really made me love her even more. But following on from that, how has making this film actually changed your understanding of Selena, even as a fan?
I think, I mean, it's really deep in my relationship to her in kind of an unbelievable way. I think for me, it really kind of, it did, I think, when a symbol in some ways is an object, and so in some ways, I think prior to working on this film, I had been inadvertently objectifying her in my mind. I think that working on this film and getting to know her family and getting to know her, she became, it's really honestly like, not to go too deep into the psychology of it, it's a little strange because I got to know this person who will never know me back, and I will never know in life, but I feel like I got to know her so much better as a person. And in doing that, like she became a much bigger presence in like my day-to-day life. I just feel her presence because I got to know her family and I got so kind of close to her family. And her family will now be a part of my life for, the rest of my life. And so I think it changed me in that way. But I think it also it really reinforced like a lot of what Selena had meant to me symbolically prior to me making this movie is still there, and it has only intensified. Like she really, like what Selena has always meant to me as a Mexican American living in the United States is that she taught me to be really like truly proud of a bicultural identity, and to be kind of unapologetic about the nuances of that identity. And I think making this film, it just really reinforced that. And I think that has kind of in some ways expanded my confidence. I think I'm a lot more confident in the way that I explain my background and who I am, and that my Spanish is not perfect, and just a lot of parallels between my story and Selena's story that have given me kind of confidence to be really proud of those facets of my personality. So yeah, I mean, it has been a life-changing experience, and I'm so grateful for it.
What a gift. Look, as an Italian Australian, I completely understand what you're saying as well.
Yeah.
It's essential. It's actually, in this day and age, particularly, I got to say that this film stays with you for all the right reasons. I was really surprised by this. I loved it. It's the kind that just lingers long after the credits fade. Isabel, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.